Hello and welcome back. In this section, we're going to be cutting out the dresser from the background and putting it on a pure white background. Let's take a look at our image. So we're continuing from our last section. We've already composited our images together for this top as well as the side. And looking at this image, why do we have to cut this out from the background? Well, let's take a look at what our background looks like. It is a nice white background, and that's totally what we want. It's going to help us out when we cut this out, but it's not quite good enough to just put it on the web exactly how it is. And the reason is we still have quite a bit of a gradient in the white. Let's take a color sample. I'm just on a new layer here. We'll take a color sample and see that's the white that's on the very top here. Now let's take the white that's on the ground. There we go. And then the white that's over here. Okay, and then some of this over there. And you can see this is not, it's not all the same color for one, and we have a pretty big gradient. Some, we have lighter whites here and darker. It doesn't look like that big of a change, but it really, really is. So by cutting out the object from its background, what we're gonna have is the ability to then pull in just the shadow that we want, and then we can put this on really any background that we want. So let's go ahead, we're gonna make that layer invisible. Now, these three layers, what we're going to do is group them together, and I'm going to create a layer mask for the entire group. That's going to be cutting the cabinet or the dresser out of its background. Let's hold Control or Command and click on each of these layers. We'll hit Control or Command G to group those together. So let's just call this dresser. There we are. And now, because I know I'm going to be placing a solid color background here, we're going to create a adjustment layer, which you can go down to this, looks like a half light, half dark circle. Okay, and go to solid color. You can also go to layer, down to new fill layer, and over to solid color. In this case, we're going to go all the way up to white, and we're going to put this on the background. We'll go ahead and group that with itself, and we're just going to call this background. Keep in mind, we're going to have a couple different backgrounds here. I'm just trying to stay organized here. So we've got our dresser and we've got our background, and we're ready to start cutting our dresser out of the background. Again, the best way to do this is the pen tool. You may be tempted in this case to use the magic wand, and that's totally okay. Let's take a look at what the magic wand tool does. So if you've never used Photoshop, the magic wand tool is just a quick way of making selections. And it's not a bad tool to use for this application, but it's not as accurate as a tool like the pen tool. For instance, if I zoom in and click on my magic wand, there we go. I'm going to hold Shift and click on this background. There we go. And this is what I would consider pretty much like best case scenario. Really simple background, very well defined edges. This is a great place to try using the magic wand tool. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to hit Q for our quick mask. Okay, the quick mask itself will just give us a little view of what our selection looks like. So from this point of view, the selection looks pretty clean. As we zoom in, we can see we've got quite a bit of change here. You can see it kind of goes out and then back in and then out. There's the layer mask, or the selection itself is, you can see we've got some areas where it kind of dips in there and there. It's a little bit inconsistent here, and especially along the edge. So it is a very quick way to make a selection like this, but it's not going to be as accurate as using a tool like the pen tool. Not only that, but you can actually clean up edges. For instance, this edge, we want it to make sure it's a straight edge from top to bottom. If I use the pen tool to cut this out, I can actually create that straight edge with the pen tool itself. So the pen tool can be used as a way of cleaning up edges and making products actually look a little bit better. Before we get started cutting out, let's go to Window and down to Paths. This is where the pen paths are stored. I'm going to create a new path, and we're just going to double click and call this dresser. There we are. Now, in this case, all I have to do is hit P for the pen tool. We can go back to our layers, and I'm just going to click on the corners of my object. So you can see it really doesn't take too long. Now, if I have a little edge right here, there we go, like a little rounded edge, instead of just clicking here, I'm going to click and drag up in this direction, and you're going to see it basically just creates my rounded edge. So very, very easy to use. Now we'll go down to the bottom of our dresser here. There we are. We have a tiny little rounded edge there. There we are. Let's go ahead and just hold Alt or Option and bring that out. And that's going to take care of our little rounded edge there too. So we can see here, if I zoom in, I can still move this. If I hold Control or Command, I can move this point out just a little bit, which I think we are going to do. And right down here, if I want, I can move this point out too. Control or Command, we'll just move that out. But my pen path is giving me a perfectly straight line from top to bottom. That line is uncompromising. It's perfectly straight. Now we can see the furniture itself is kind of getting closer and farther from that line. You can see it kind of bulges out there, goes in a little bit over here, and right there it's almost perfect with the line. What that's telling me is that the line itself on the furniture is not perfectly straight. There are also times when you just want to make a product look as good as it possibly can, and this is one of those cases. So we're going to use the straight line that I just created from the pen path here to cut this out of its background, and that's actually going to make the product look better. Let's go ahead and continue to cut out our, there we go, our dresser. A couple of clicks there, a little click and drag for our little, there we are, for our little radius. And you can see it's a little bit, I wouldn't say dirty, there are just some scuffs and things like that here on the bottom. Now I'm staying slightly to the inside of the object itself. There we go. I just really don't want to select my background in this case because we're cutting the object out of its background, right? Now, don't worry if your selection is not absolutely perfect. There are many, many things we can do to work on our selections and work on our paths after the fact if we need to. There we go. And keep in mind, I'm almost 2000% zoom right here. So, you know, if we're like 1 or 2 pixels off at this zoom level, that's not going to register at any normal viewing angle. All right. Click down here. We'll click and drag for the angle there. We'll bring this back up. The pen tool is probably one of the more tedious tools to use in Photoshop. It just kind of takes some time, but what you gain from using the pen tool is a level of precision in your selections that is unmatched with any other tool. And like I said, you can actually use the tool itself to make your objects look even better. For instance, here, if I just bring this up to that point, it's tilting out slightly. I'm going to exaggerate. But if I hold Shift, it makes that line stay straight up and down. So what I can do is you can see it's actually going out a little bit. If I hold Shift, it pulls it back in. So now this line is perfectly straight up and down. There we go. And you're going to see maybe it will cut a little bit of this off the piece of wood, but the furniture as a whole is going to look better because it's a perfectly straight line now. There we are. So just another example of using these tools to help overall with the presentation of the object. There we are. We'll click and drag here for that curve, and we'll go right back over to the other side. Let's go ahead and click there. Perfect. So we've traced basically around our entire object, and we're ready to turn that into a selection. Now, I know we have some areas here, that white area down there, and that white area down there. That's not a big deal. We can take care of those separately. So for now, let's just go ahead and cut this out, right? We want to do the majority of the work here. So we've made our pen path around the object itself. Let's right click and we're going to go to make selection. And again, let's feather this by 0 for now because we can always add a little bit of feathering later. Not a big deal to do that, but it's hard to take away feathering. So we'll start with 0. Let's hit OK there. Now in this case, keep in mind the dresser is made up of a few different layers. So I'm not going to use the layer mask on individual layers. I'm going to use the mask on the group instead. Let's click on our mask icon, and there we can see we've masked out our object from the background. Now it's perfectly cut out. Let's hold Alt or Option and click on the background, or click on the layer mask rather, and we can see this is the actual mask for the object itself, which looks really great. So very well cut out already. Like most of our work is done for us. Obviously we don't have a shadow, but if I decide to change the background color, it's really easy to do because there is no background to the dresser right now. Okay, now I know we have to take care of this area, but check this out. We can put it on a black background, red, white, it doesn't really matter at this point because the dresser's cut out. Let's go ahead and add to our selection. So we'll go to our paths. Now we'll create a new path here. All right, I'm just going to call this inner because this is going to be for our two inner areas here. So let's go ahead and zoom in. We're still using the pen tool, so we'll click here. There we are. Just make sure we're nice and zoomed in here. Again, because I don't want to select this white. If I select out this side, you know, this area in the white, then it's going to be included in my cutout. And let's say I try to put a different color background in there, you're going to see a little bit of that white. So you want to make sure you don't select the white. Now let's go over here to the other side and we'll finish this up. See, this is an area where you can see it kind of bulges out a little bit there, that it doesn't look super clean. So I'm actually going to clean this up with the pen tool. We'll click there. I'm going to hold Shift, click right up there. So that line is straight up and down now. There we are. Click there. Again, I'm going to hold Shift. We'll go down there so we can see we've cleaned that up too. And this is a handmade item. So, you know, it's perfectly reasonable that it's going to have a few little details like that are not 100% perfect. There we are. And you can see I've included a little bit of the white here on the outline. As I've selected this out, it's just a little bit too much of the white. So what I'm going to do is I've got my pen tool. I'll just click on this point and hold Control. Hold Control and click on that point and then just drag it down. And there we go. So after you've made the pen path, there you can really, really easily redefine. There we go. Move that down too. Redefine your selections. And that looks pretty good. So now with our inner, let's just zoom out here. So our inner path, we have this area and this area. Let's right click here and we'll go to make selection. We'll feather that by 0 pixels. And then back on our layer mask, we'll go to the dresser layer mask. And I just need to fill this with black because anything that's white on a layer mask is going to be visible. Anything that's black will be invisible. So we have our selection active. Now I can unclick off of this path and we can see both of our selections are active here and here. We'll go back to our layers and then clicking on the layer mask, again, I just need to fill this with black. So our selections are active. We'll go to Edit, down to Fill, and we're going to choose black as the content. So let's hit OK there. There we go. And let's deselect by hitting Control or Command D. So now we filled that area with black. If I hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask, this is now what my layer mask looks like. So we can see it's a very nice, clean layer mask. It's literally just the object. Let's hold Alt or Option one more time. There we go. And you can see if I double click on my background, now I can change my background color and it's going to look great. There we go. We have none of the background showing up over the dresser. So let's go back to white for now because that's where we're going to leave it. So we got our dresser cut out from the background. There's one more thing we're going to be doing in this section and then we're going to be done. We're going to take the existing shadow that's underneath the dresser and we're going to put that on its own layer. Such a cool technique. Let's go back to our image now. Let's take a look at our shadow. So we have, if I hold Shift and click on this layer mask, it just disables it temporarily. So I can go back to this image here, the Dresser on White version 1, part 1, and this is the image that contains my shadow. So keep in mind that it's being cut out because it's in this group that has this mask on it, right? But all I have to do is just duplicate this layer and then use that for the shadow. So let's try duplicating. Controller Command J to duplicate. Now I'm going to put this down beneath my dresser. So I'm going to hold Controller Command and open bracket. I'm going to hit that twice, and that takes this outside of my group. Now at this point, things are getting just a little bit complicated as far as our layers and masks and groups go. I've got a great tip for you. Just right click on the eye. So this is a group. You can see it's a folder icon. I'm going to right click on the eye right next to the folder that icon there, and I'm just going to give it a color. So doing that basically makes it a very easy way to see what's actually inside of that group. Okay, my background, I'm going to go ahead and give that a color. My instructions will give that a color. And let's go ahead and group this with itself. That's going to be called shadow. And we're going to give this a different color as well. There we go. Let's make that blue. So now just a little bit easier to see what we're actually doing. So how do we go from this image here, where we have a perfectly cut out background, to include our shadows? Well, the first thing I want to do is set up a layer mask for this layer, because we really don't need most of this layer. All this other stuff out here, I don't need it all. I just want the shadow. So what we're going to do is I'm going to grab our lasso tool. Real simple here. We'll just lasso tool, and this is like a start, basically, okay? This is a very quick start. We're lasso tooling just the area that I need. I don't need anything else outside of there. So let's go ahead and click on our layer mask here, and we can see what our layer does now. So we're on our way. Again, this is our dresser here, and this is our shadow. Now, looking at this, there are a couple of changes that we need to make. First, obviously, the layer mask itself needs to be refined. But second is you can see that the floor here is a little bit darker than the white background that we want to put it on. And we want those things to match. So what we're going to do is a couple of things. One, we've got to get this floor to be a little bit lighter. And two, I've got to get this shadow to show up even on different colors of backgrounds. For instance, if I change my background color now to like red, okay, even if I match the floor color with the white that was there, you can see this shadow is not going to look correct now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to change the blending mode of this shadow. This is a super helpful technique. You can do this on any image that you do, any kind of compositing, anytime you need to add a shadow. We're using the original shadow, but I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. Now, what a multiply blend mode does is it only allows the dark areas of that layer to show through, which is perfect for a shadow, right? Because you just want the dark areas. So changing this to multiply, basically I'm going to be able to get rid of the background and have just that shadow show up. And the nice thing about this, that shadow will show up even on different colors of backgrounds. Let's go ahead and change our blending mode. So we have our shadow group, and keep in mind this shadow is just a copy of my Dresser on White V1P1. You can see that in the file name. We're going to change the layer blend mode from normal down to multiply. And already you can see we have the existing shadow from our object, and it's going to show through no matter what I do with my background. Let's go ahead and change it back to white, so we got a little bit more work to do. There we are. Now, the shadow does look good, but we can see this area here is just a little bit too bright. Okay, how do we take care of that? Well, let's just do a little bit of analysis on this. This area here is light, and this area here in comparison is dark. So if I make my lights a little bit lighter, and I keep the darks the same, or maybe make those a little bit darker, the lights getting lighter, because this layer is set to a multiply blend mode, the lighter areas become invisible, right? So if I decide I want to make my light areas even lighter, what they're going to wind up being is invisible on this layer. So let's give it a shot. Okay, so we know we're going to use multiply. I know I want to make my light areas lighter, and that has to be on this layer. Now, the best way to do this is to use a levels adjustment layer that's clipped to this layer. Now, if you've never used a clipping mask, we'll show you how to do it. Our clipping mask, let's say I just draw over top of our entire image, okay? I draw wherever I want. Now, if I want this layer to only show up over top of the underlying layer, I can right click and go to create clipping mask, and you can see there it shows up just where this layer is showing up, right? In fact, it has a little arrow pointing down to it. So the purple is only showing up where this dresser is visible now. So that's a little bit of an abstract example. If, let's say we grab a levels adjustment layer, right now I can make this brighter or darker. Let's just make our background not white so you get the idea here, okay? I can make this brighter or darker, and you can see as of now it's affecting our whole image. But if I right click and go to create a clipping mask, making this brighter or darker is now just affecting the area. It's just affecting this layer, okay? It's not affecting the background or anything underneath it. So that's the idea behind a clipping mask. Basically, if you need to change the color or visibility or light levels of a layer, use a clipping mask. It's a very great non-destructive way of doing that. And we'll continue to use this more throughout the tutorial. Now that we know how that works, let's just double click on our solid color background again. We'll just get that to white. There we are. And now this levels adjustment layer, let's just reset it to its original point. Now, remember earlier what we said. We want to take this background that's pretty close to white, and we want to make it even brighter. So we're going to use this levels adjustment layer to do so. And keep in mind, this levels adjustment layer, you see this little arrow is clipped to the shadow, okay? The layer with the shadow on it. So this is only going to be visible where this is visible. So here in my levels adjustment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my white point, and this is our white point. So we have our black point, gray point, and white point. I'm going to take my white point and click and drag from the right to the left, and we're just going to make that lighter. Okay, that's all I'm going to do is I'm just going to make my white point a little bit whiter. There we go. And as I do this, you're going to see the lighter areas start to disappear. There we go. And the darker areas remain because we are using this layer here has a multiply blend mode. If I change that back to normal, okay, and we have a different color, we can see it just lightens it, right? But because this is set to multiply, there we go, it actually makes the lighter areas invisible. Again, the reason there is because a multiply blend mode will make lighter areas invisible and darker areas visible. Bringing all that together, we have the light areas of this layer are now invisible, as you can see. The darker areas are visible, showing up in the shadow. Not only that, but because we're using a multiply blend layer, the shadow itself is actually taking on some of the color of the background, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want, because if the shadow was just gray, then it wouldn't look real, right? It needs to blend with the background color. Okay, let's bring it all together. So making our background white once more, we've got our shadow here. Let's go ahead and turn our dresser on right above that. So our dresser's on, visible right above the shadow. There we go. We've got our shadow that I can turn off and on underneath that. And it's the original shadow from the dresser itself. There's nothing crazy going on there. And I can double click and I can change my background color. And look at that. Even on a dark background, it looks really, really good. And we're looking great. We do have a couple of things we still want to do to finish this image off. That's going to be retouching in our next section.